A seat at the edge. The docking clamps were old. That was the first thing Han Do-hyun noticed when the shuttle locked into place at Citadel Amir. The clamps groaned and shook, and for a moment the entire cabin rattled like a tin box in a storm. Do-hyun held the armrest and said nothing. Behind him, Park So-yoon gripped the edge of her seat and looked at him with wide eyes. "They gave us the lowest tier again," she said quietly. "They always do," Do-hyun replied. He stood up, straightened his dark suit, and picked up his briefcase. It was plain black leather, worn at the corners. He had carried it to every assembly session for the past 9 years. Inside were papers, notes, and a small framed photograph of Earth taken from the moon. He never told anyone about the photograph. It was just something he liked to keep close. The airlock opened, and the smell of Citadel Amir hit them. It was the smell of metal and recycled air, and 1,000 alien species living together on a station the size of a small moon. Do-hyun stepped out onto the docking platform and looked around. The lowest tier was dark and narrow. The lights buzzed overhead. The walls were stained with age. Far above them, through layers of glass and steel, the upper tiers of the station shone bright and clean, where the powerful species kept their embassies. So-yeon walked beside him carrying a tablet under her arm. 2 aides followed behind, along with a single security officer named Kwon Ji-hoo, a tall man with a calm face who never spoke unless he had to. "The session begins in 4 hours, So-yeon said, reading from her tablet. "Your speech is loaded and ready. The petition documents have been submitted to the assembly clerk." "Good. Ambassador," So-yeon said carefully, "the word from our contacts is not encouraging. The Cathari and the Palox have already decided to vote no. The Terrani are expected to follow." Do-hyun kept walking. His shoes clicked on the metal floor. "And the Silvani?" "Undecided, but leaning against us." He nodded slowly. He had expected this. He had expected this for 22 years, ever since Earth first sent a delegation to the Galactic Assembly and was told to sit in the corner and watch. They had been watching ever since, learning, waiting, smiling politely while species that had been traveling the stars for 10,000 years looked at them the way a grown man looks at a child who has wandered into a board meeting. "We present the petition anyway," Do-hyun said. "We present it with everything we have." 4 hours later, he stood at the speaker's platform on the assembly floor. The chamber was enormous. It was shaped like a bowl, with rows of seats rising up on every side, each section belonging to a different species. There were 761 member species in the Galactic Assembly. Their representatives filled the chamber with color and noise and movement. Some were tall and thin, with skin like polished stone. Some were small and covered in feathers. Some floated in liquid tanks. Some had no bodies at all and appeared only as light. And at the very bottom, at the very edge, there was a small section with 5 seats. That was Earth's section. Observer status. No vote. No voice in any decision. Just 5 seats and a view of everyone else. Do-hyun stood at the central podium and looked up at all of them. He took a slow breath. "Honored members of the Galactic Assembly," he began. His voice was steady and clear. "I speak today on behalf of the United Earth Council and the 8 billion people of our world. For 22 years, Earth has held observer status in this assembly. In that time, we have signed 64 treaties. We have paid every tariff. We have violated no agreements. We have asked for nothing that was not fair, and we have given everything that was asked of us." He paused. The chamber was quiet, but it was not the quiet of respect. It was the quiet of boredom. He could see delegates checking their devices. He could see others whispering to their aides. He continued, "Today I formally present Earth's petition for 3 things. First, full voting membership in the Galactic Assembly. Second, unrestricted access to shared hyperspace travel lanes. Third, inclusion in the Mutual Defense Compact. He placed the documents on the podium. We believe we have earned this. We ask you to judge us on our record. Grand Speaker Olvanus, a tall figure with silver robes and a face like carved marble, acknowledged the petition and opened the floor for discussion. Delegate Shurith of the Cathari Trade Union was the first to speak. He was a wide, heavy creature with 4 arms and a voice like gravel rolling downhill. He did not even look at Doyun when he spoke. Earth's total economic output is less than the annual revenue of a single Cathari mining district, Shurith said, and the chamber rippled with quiet laughter. Their goods are quaint. Their services are limited. Granting them full membership would be like giving a market stall a seat on a banking council. Next came War Chief Gromund of the Palox Military Pact. He was massive, armored in bone plates that grew from his own skin. He leaned forward and grinned, showing rows of flat teeth. Humans, he said, as if the word itself was a joke. Soft-boned, slow. They needed 300 years just to escape their own gravity. My species crossed the stars while theirs was still burning wood for warmth. He laughed, and the sound echoed across the chamber. Others laughed with him. Then Emissary Liathine of the Sylvani Collective spoke. She was graceful, with a voice like wind through leaves, and she spoke with what sounded like kindness. That made it worse. Humanity is young, she said gently. They are eager, and that is admirable. But eagerness is not readiness. They should be grateful they are allowed to observe and learn from those who have walked this path far longer than they have. She smiled at Dohyun. It was the kind of smile you give to a child who asks to sit at the adult's table. The vote was called. Dohyun stood perfectly still as the numbers appeared on the central display. Against, 761. In favor, 3. 1 abstention. The chamber moved on to the next agenda item without a pause. Dohyun collected his papers, placed them back in his briefcase, and walked off the floor. No one spoke to him. No one even looked at him. Soyun and Jihu fell in step beside him as he walked down the long corridor back to the human quarters. They walked in silence for a long time. The corridor was empty. Their footsteps echoed off the walls. Through a viewport on the left, the stars burned cold and distant. Soyun finally spoke. Ambassador, are you all right? Dohyun stopped. He stood before the viewport and looked out at the blackness of space. His reflection stared back at him, a small figure against an infinite dark. Send a priority signal to Secretary General Kwan, he said. His voice was quiet and even. Use Channel 9. Soyun's breath caught. Channel 9 was Earth's wartime encryption line. It had never been used outside of a drill. Tell him, Dohyun said, still looking at the stars. The answer was no. 12 minutes later, on Earth, deep inside a bunker beneath the floor of the Pacific Ocean, Secretary General Kwan Taeho sat alone at a steel table. A single light hung above him. A screen on the wall displayed 4 words. The answer was no. Taeho read it once. He breathed in and breathed out. Then he opened a locked drawer, pulled out a red folder, and wrote his signature at the bottom of the first page. The folder was labeled Directive 0. He set down the pen and pressed a button on the table. A voice answered immediately. Sir? Wake everyone up, Taeho said. All departments, all stations, effective now. He closed the folder and placed both hands flat on the table. His face showed nothing, but his hands, pressed hard against the cold steel, were trembling. Somewhere far above, past the ocean and the sky and the black of space, Dohyun was still standing at the viewport on Citadel Omeyer. He had not moved. He was watching the stars, and for the first time in 22 years, he was not smiling. The quiet before. 48 hours had passed since the vote, and the galaxy had already forgotten about it. Earth's humiliation was not even worth remembering. It was just another routine denial, another small species reminded of its place. The Assembly had moved on to trade disputes and border agreements, and nobody thought about the 5 empty seats at the edge of the chamber. That was exactly what Earth was counting on. Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, in the bunker that officially did not exist, Director Baek Jisoo sat in front of 14 screens. Each screen showed a different world. Each world had humans living on it, working quiet jobs in quiet places. They were accountants on Cathari trading posts, engineers on Paylok shipyards, shipping clerks on Silvani agricultural colonies, teachers, technicians, maintenance workers, ordinary people doing ordinary work. Except none of them were ordinary. Jisoo had built this network over 18 years. She had recruited carefully, trained patiently, and placed each operative where they could learn the most while being noticed the least. They were not soldiers. They were not assassins. They were something far more dangerous. They were people who paid attention. For 18 years, they had mapped everything. Every supply chain, every power grid, every financial pipeline, every software system, every single thread that held the galactic economy together. They knew which Cathari factories depended on human-made parts. They knew which Paylok's warships ran on human-coded navigation systems. They knew which Silvani farming worlds would collapse without human-engineered bacteria in their soil. And none of this had happened by accident. Secretary General Kwon Tae-ho stood behind Jisoo, his hands clasped behind his back, his face as still as stone. He had not slept since the message from Do-ha-yoon arrived. "How deep does it go?" he asked. Jisoo did not turn from her screens. "Deep enough, sir. Over the past 2 decades, we made ourselves useful in ways they never thought to question. The Cathari let us build their intermediate manufacturing because it was cheap. The Payloks licensed our navigation software because it was better than theirs. The Silvani accepted our agricultural technology because it tripled their crop yields." She paused. "They thought they were using us. They never considered that we were threading ourselves into their foundations." Tae-ho was quiet for a long moment. "And if we pull those threads, then foundations crack." He nodded slowly. "Show me the fleet." Jisoo changed the screens. The images shifted to a dark stretch of space behind Neptune, far from any trade lane, far from any alien sensor. And there, hidden in the cold shadow of the solar system's edge, was something the galaxy did not know about. 340 warships. They hung in perfect formation in the black. Destroyers, cruisers, carriers, and at the center of them all, a ship so large it bent the starlight around it. The UES Jindo, Dreadnought class, the most powerful vessel humanity had ever built. Fleet Admiral Yoon Nari stood on the bridge of the Jindo and looked out through the forward viewport at her fleet. She was 53 years old, with short gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She had spent her entire career preparing for a day she hoped would never come. Now it was here, and she felt nothing but a calm, steady focus. Her executive officer, Commander Oh Sun-ho, approached with a tablet. "Admiral, all battle groups report ready. Weapon systems are hot. Skip drives are charged. We are awaiting your order." Nari did not take the tablet. She kept looking at the fleet. "How long have we been building in secret, Sun-ho?" 15 years, Admiral." 15 years, she repeated quietly. 15 years of night shifts. 15 years of workers who could never tell their families what they did. 15 years of metals and fuel, quietly diverted from civilian projects. She turned to face him. "Every person who built these ships did so knowing the galaxy would call us liars and cheats the moment they found out." "Yes, Admiral." "Then we had better make sure this was worth it." She straightened her uniform. Open a channel to all commanders. Her voice went out to every ship in the fleet, heard by every officer and every crew member who had spent years living in the shadow of Neptune, training in silence, waiting for a signal. This is Admiral Yoon Nari. For 22 years, we asked the galaxy to treat us as equals. For 15 years, we have been building the means to ensure they never refuse again. I will not lie to you. What we are about to do will change everything. There is no going back after this. But I want you to remember something. She paused. We did not start this. We asked nicely. We asked politely. We asked again and again. They laughed at us every single time. So now, we stop asking. She closed the channel and turned to Sunho. Status of Project Blackthorn. Dr. Shin Eunji reports full operational readiness. On the other side of the solar system, in an underground laboratory on the far side of the moon, Shin Eunji was running final checks on a holographic map of the galaxy. The map was covered in thousands of tiny red dots, each one marking the location of a device that Eunji and her team had spent 12 years building and placing. They were small devices. Some were the size of a suitcase. Some were no bigger than a fist. They had been disguised as mining buoys, research satellites, navigation beacons, and communication relays. They had been planted near every major hyperspace junction in the galaxy, carried there on human cargo ships, and left behind during routine trade runs. Nobody had questioned them. Nobody had scanned them closely. Why would they? They were just pieces of human junk floating near the lanes. Humans were harmless. Each device contained a single piece of technology that Eunji had invented in secret. When activated, it generated a specific energy pulse that collapsed the local hyperspace field. One device could shut down a single lane. All of them, activated together, could shut down every hyperspace lane in the galaxy at once. Eunji stood before the map, a cup of cold coffee in her hand, and looked at the red dots scattered across 1,000 sectors. Her assistant, a young man named Ryu Hajun, stood beside her with a nervous expression. Doctor, if we activate the full network, hyperspace travel across the entire galaxy will stop. Every ship in transit will be thrown out of their lanes. Every fleet will be stranded wherever they are. Recovery time is estimated at 9 to 11 months. I know, Eunji said. The economic damage alone would be... I know, Hajun. He swallowed. Are we really doing this? Eunji put down her coffee. She looked at the map one more time. Then she picked up a communicator and called Taeho directly. Secretary General, Project Blackthorn is fully operational. All devices are in position. Activation can be initiated on your command with a single signal. Transit time for the signal to reach all devices is approximately 40 minutes. There was silence on the other end. Then Taeho's voice came through, calm and heavy. Thank you, Doctor. Stand by. Back on Citadel Omir, Do-hyun was playing his part perfectly. He had requested a reconciliation audience with Grand Speaker Alvanis. It was a formal procedure, a diplomatic tool used by denied petitioners to plead their case one more time. It was seen as a gesture of weakness, a defeated species crawling back for another chance. That was exactly how Do-hyun wanted it to look. The request bought 72 hours, 3 full days, before the Assembly would officially close Earth's petition file. 3 days for Earth to move everything into position. So-hyun found Do-hyun in the small human quarters, sitting in the dark, reading over papers by the light of his tablet. They think you are begging, she said from the doorway. Good, Do-hyun said without looking up. Ambassador, what happens when the 72 hours are up? He set down his tablet and looked at her. His face was tired, but his eyes were sharp and clear. When the 72 hours are up, So-hyun, this station and everyone on it will learn something that they should have learned 22 years ago. What is that? He almost smiled. Almost. That the quiet ones are the ones you should have been watching. She wanted to ask more, but something in his expression told her the conversation was over. She nodded and left. Do-hyun sat alone in the dark room. Through the small viewport, the stars turned slowly past. Somewhere out there, behind Neptune, Nari's fleet was waiting. Somewhere out there, Unji's devices were humming in the cold of space. Somewhere below the Pacific, Taeho was sitting in his bunker with two folders open in front of him. One was labeled Severance. The other was labeled Blackthorn. The galaxy was sleeping peacefully, certain that the small species at the edge of the assembly floor was harmless and broken. 70 hours after the vote, at exactly 0600 Galactic Standard Time, every human being on every alien world in the galaxy received the same message on their personal device. It was short, it was clear, and it told them to leave. On the Kethari trading world of Bosvoran, a human woman named Lee Yuna read the message in the break room of the parts factory where she had worked for 6 years. She put down her coffee, picked up her bag, and walked out the front door without saying goodbye to anyone. Her Kethari supervisor watched her go with confusion. By the time he thought to call after her, she was already at the shuttle port. On the Paylok shipyard orbiting their homeworld, a human software engineer named Kang Do-ha logged out of his workstation for the last time. He had written and maintained the navigation targeting code for nearly 40% of the Paylok's military fleet. He deleted nothing, he simply logged out, and every software license tied to his credentials expired automatically. The system still worked, but without license renewal, they would begin to degrade within weeks. On the Solvani farming colony of Maleth, a human biologist named Seo Ha-yoon sealed her laboratory, packed her personal belongings into a single bag, and walked to the transport hub. She had spent 8 years engineering the soil bacteria that kept 3 entire agricultural worlds producing food. Without her maintenance protocols, the bacteria would begin to die within 2 growing cycles. The Sylvani did not have the knowledge to maintain them alone. None of these people spoke to the aliens they left behind. None of them explained. They simply left, quietly and quickly, as if they had always known this day would come. Because they had. At the same moment, across 114 worlds, every human embassy, trade office, cultural mission, and scientific outpost transmitted the same official message to their host governments and to the Galactic Assembly. The message read, "The United Earth Council hereby withdraws from all treaties, compacts, and agreements held with the Galactic Assembly and its member states, effective immediately. All human personnel will depart within 12 hours. This decision is final." There was no anger in the message, no accusations, no dramatic farewell. It was written in the flat, calm language of bureaucracy. It read like a tax notice, and that was what made it so deeply unsettling to every species that received it. On Citadel Omir, Grand Speaker Ulvanis was woken from his rest cycle by a frantic aide. Then he called an emergency session of the assembly. The chamber was in chaos before he even took his seat. Delegates were shouting over each other. Aides were running between sections with tablets and communicators. On every screen in the chamber, the same message scrolled in 100 different languages. Delegate Shureth of the Kethari was the first to truly understand what was happening, and he was terrified. He stood in his section, all 4 arms waving, shouting into a communicator at someone back on his homeworld. "What do you mean the factories are stopping? Get other workers. Replace them." The voice on the other end was shaking. "Delegate, we are trying, but the humans were the only ones who understood the intermediate assembly processes. They designed the systems. Our people do not know how to operate them. Production has already dropped by 30% in the last 3 hours." Shureth went pale. The Kethari economy ran on trade. Trade ran on manufacturing. And a significant piece of their manufacturing had been quietly, carefully, invisibly built around human expertise. Not because humans had forced their way in, but because they had been cheap, reliable, and willing to do the work nobody else wanted. The Cathari had welcomed them the same way a homeowner welcomes a good plumber. They never thought about what would happen if the plumber left and took all his tools with him. Across the chamber, War Chief Grummond was receiving similar reports. His military aides were pale and shaken. War Chief, the navigation targeting systems on our Vanguard-class cruisers are showing license expiration warnings. Without renewal, accuracy will degrade to 60% within 30 days and become non-functional within 90. Grummond stared at his aide as if the man had spoken nonsense. Our warships depend on human software? It was cheaper than developing our own, War Chief, and more accurate. It was approved by the Procurement Council 12 years ago. Grummond's bone-plated face twisted with fury. He turned toward the assembly floor, looking for someone to blame, someone to hit. But the 5 human seats at the edge of the chamber were empty. Dohun and his delegation had not come to the session. Emissary Leothany of the Sylvani was quieter in her panic, but no less disturbed. She sat in her section with her eyes closed, listening to reports from Malith and the other agricultural worlds. The numbers were grim. Without human biological maintenance, 3 worlds faced food shortages within a year. The Sylvani had the scientific knowledge to eventually replace the human systems, but eventually meant years. People would go hungry long before then. Leothany opened her eyes and looked across the chamber. She was the only one in the room who was not shouting. She was the only one who was starting to understand that this was not a tantrum. This was not a desperate gesture by a wounded species lashing out in anger. This was a plan. A plan that had been building for years, maybe decades, right under their noses. She had called them young, eager. She had smiled at their ambassador like he was a child. She was beginning to realize that the child had been the smartest person in the room. Grand Speaker Ulvanis brought the chamber to order with great difficulty. His silver robes were wrinkled. His composure was cracking. He stood at the central podium and raised both hands for silence. Earth has made a reckless decision, he declared. They have broken faith with the Assembly, but we will not be shaken by this. The Assembly will respond with strength and unity. Grummond stood immediately. His voice boomed across the chamber like a hammer hitting stone. I demand military authorization. We send a fleet to their little world and we teach them what happens when vermin bite the hand that feeds them. They have no fleet. They have no weapons worth fearing. This ends in a day. There were murmurs of agreement across the chamber. Grummond's confidence was infectious. Everyone knew that Earth's military consisted of 12 patrol frigates. The idea of humanity as a military threat was laughable. They were traders and workers and scientists. They were soft. Ulvanis looked to the other delegates. Shurith, desperate and angry, nodded. Even some of the smaller species, afraid of the economic ripple effects, supported the idea of forcing Earth back into compliance. Only Leothan remained silent. She was thinking. Something about this felt wrong. Something about the way the humans had left. So clean, so organized, so fast, as if they had rehearsed it. Ulvanis drafted an ultimatum. It was approved by emergency vote within the hour. The message was sent directly to Earth. The Galactic Assembly demands that the United Earth Council reinstate all treaties, agreements, and cooperative arrangements within 48 hours. Failure to comply will be met with collective military response. This is not negotiable. The message traveled across the stars and arrived on Citadel Omir's human communication terminal 11 minutes later. Do-Hyun read it in the small human quarters, while So-Yoon stood beside him. The room was half empty now. Most of the staff had already packed. Do-Hyun read the ultimatum once, folded the paper neatly along its crease, and set it on the desk. They are going to send a fleet, So-Yoon said. Her voice was tight. Yes. Gromund? Almost certainly. Ambassador, if they mobilize a full combined fleet, that could be 500 or 600 warships. I know. And they think we have 12 frigates. Do-hyun looked at her. For the first time since the vote, there was something in his eyes that was not tiredness or patience or quiet endurance. It was the faintest trace of something sharp, something that had been waiting a very long time to show itself. Send a message to Admiral Yoon, he said. Tell her she may proceed to Phase 2. So Yoon hesitated for just 1 second. Then she nodded and left the room. Do-hyun stood up, adjusted his suit, and picked up his briefcase. He walked out of the human quarters and down the long corridor toward the assembly chamber. He entered through the observer's door, the small door at the side that nobody important ever used. He walked to the 5 seats at the edge of the floor. He sat down in his usual chair, the one with the bad cushion that had never been replaced in 22 years. He placed his briefcase on his lap, folded his hands on top of it, and waited. Around him, the assembly was preparing for war. Above him, the powerful species of the galaxy were assembling the largest fleet in a century. And Do-hyun sat in his small seat at the edge and watched them with eyes that gave nothing away. The clock was ticking, 48 hours, and the galaxy had no idea what it was counting down to. Blackthorn. The Armada launched on schedule. 600 warships entered hyperspace in a single, thundering wave. 300 Palox heavy cruisers with bone-white hulls and weapons that could melt continents. 200 Cathari battle frigates loaded with plasma turrets and drone swarms. 100 Turani capital ships, each one the size of a city, gleaming like silver knives. It was the largest combined fleet assembled in over a century. And War Chief Gromund stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dread of Palox, and watched the swirling blue of hyperspace fill his viewport with the satisfied look of a predator closing in on wounded prey. Time to Earth system? He asked. 14 hours at current speed, War Chief. Gromund grunted. 14 hours. Then he would arrive at that tiny blue world with its 12 little frigates, and he would show the entire galaxy what happened to species that forgot their place. He had already decided he would not destroy Earth. That would be too quick. He would blockade it, starve it, force them to crawl back to the assembly on their hands and knees and beg. He wanted Do-hyun to watch. He was thinking about this, planning the exact words he would use when accepting Earth's surrender, when the lights on his bridge flickered. Then the alarms started. Every alarm on every ship in the fleet went off at the same time. The blue of hyperspace outside the viewport began to twist and shudder. It turned from blue to white to a blinding, violent red. The Dread of Palox lurched sideways with a force that threw Gromund off his feet. He hit the floor hard, his bone plates cracking against the metal deck. Around him, his crew grabbed at consoles and walls and each other. "What is happening?" he roared. "The hyperspace lane is collapsing." All lanes are collapsing. The fleet was ripped out of hyperspace like a hand pulling fish from water. Ships tumbled into real space in every direction, scattered across dozens of sectors. The neat formation was gone. The 600 warships were now 600 isolated vessels, drifting in the dark, separated by light-years of empty space. Gromund pulled himself to his feet. His bridge was in chaos. Sparks flew from damaged consoles. Officers were shouting over each other. The main viewport showed nothing but stars and blackness. No fleet, no formation, no hyperspace glow. "Navigation, where are we?" "Unknown sector, War Chief. Our star charts are not matching local readings. We are at least 9 sectors off course." "Communications. Contact the rest of the fleet." "Trying, sir. No response from any vessel. Standard communication relies on hyperspace relay buoys. They are all offline." His entire fleet, 600 of the most powerful warships in the galaxy, was blind, scattered and alone, and they had not fired a single shot. On the far side of the moon, Shin Unji stood in her underground laboratory and watched the holographic map of the galaxy change color. One by one, every hyperspace junction turned from green to red. The network was collapsing in a wave that spread outward from 1,000 points simultaneously, each one triggered by one of her devices, pulsing its energy signal into the fabric of space. Ryu Hajin stood beside her, his face white. Full network collapse confirmed. Every major and minor hyperspace lane in the galaxy is down. All faster-than-light travel has stopped. Unji nodded. Her hands were steady, but her jaw was tight. She had built this technology. She had spent 12 years of her life designing it, testing it, placing the devices one by one on cargo runs that nobody thought to inspect. She had always hoped it would never be used. But she had built it to work, and it worked. Estimated recovery time, she asked, though she already knew the answer. 9 to 11 months for natural lane regeneration, possibly longer in sectors with heavy disruption. 9 months. For 9 months, no one in the galaxy could travel faster than light, except by means that did not use hyperspace. And there was only one species that had such means. Behind Neptune, in the orbital yards that had never appeared on any galactic survey, Fleet Admiral Yoon Nari stood on the bridge of the UES Jindo, and gave the order she had waited 15 years to give. All battle groups, activate skip drives. Formation Arrowhead, we move now. The skip drive was Earth's secret. It was not faster than hyperspace. It was not elegant. It was a brute force technology that compressed local space and allowed a ship to hop forward in short bursts, covering enormous distances in a series of rapid jumps. It shook the hull. It rattled the teeth. It made some crew members sick. But it worked without hyperspace lanes. 340 human warships activated their skip drives in unison. The space around Neptune rippled and twisted, and then the fleet was gone, jumping forward in a chain of blue-white flashes that would have looked, to anyone watching, like a line of stars being born and dying in rapid succession. They arrived at Grauman's scattered fleet in under 2 hours. Captain Cho Minho stood on the bridge of the Jindo and looked at the tactical display. The Palox flagship, the dread of Palox, hung dead in space directly ahead. Its engines were running, but it had nowhere to go. Its weapons were hot, but it had nothing to shoot at. Around it, a handful of other Palox ships that had been thrown out nearby were drifting in confused circles, trying to establish contact with each other. And now, dropping out of skip space all around them, were the ships of the United Earth Navy, destroyers, cruisers, carriers, and the Jindo itself, a dreadnought so large that Grauman's flagship looked like a lifeboat beside it. Minho took a slow breath. He was 41 years old, born in a coastal city on Earth, raised by a shipbuilder father and a schoolteacher mother. He had joined the Navy at 18 and had spent his entire adult life training for a confrontation that his world had done everything possible to avoid. Now it was here, and he was calm. "Open a wideband broadcast," he said. "All frequencies, all languages." His communications officer nodded. "Channel open, Captain." His voice went out across the void, reaching every stranded alien vessel within range, bouncing off disabled relay buoys, carrying through the silence of collapsed lanes. "This is Captain Cho Minho of the United Earthship Jindo. Your hyperspace lanes are currently unavailable. Your weapons are advised to remain cold. We are not here to destroy you. We are here to talk. But this time, we will be heard." On the dread of Palox, Gromund heard the message. He stood on his darkened bridge, surrounded by officers who were looking at him with something he had never seen in their eyes before. Fear. Not fear of the enemy. Fear that their war chief had led them into a trap so complete that there was no way out. Gromund stared at the viewport. The Jindo filled it entirely. He had never seen a human warship before. No one in the galaxy had. He had imagined something small and crude, built by a species that could barely leave its own planet. What he saw, instead, was a warship that dwarfed his own, sleek and dark, and bristling with weapons arrays that his tactical officers could not even identify. He had called them soft. He had called them vermin. He had laughed at their ambassador in front of the entire galaxy. He was not laughing now. On Citadel Omir, the assembly chamber was in the worst state of panic it had seen in 500 years. Reports were flooding in from every sector. Hyperspace was down everywhere. The combined fleet was scattered and unreachable. And now, from the few emergency sublight communication channels still functioning, came images and sensor readings that made no sense. Human warships, hundreds of them, moving freely through space while everyone else was grounded. Grand Speaker Ulvanis stood at his podium, gripping the edges so hard his knuckles had turned white. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "They had 12 frigates. 12. No one could." Emissary Leothine sat in her section, with her hands folded in her lap. She was not panicking. She was not shouting. She was looking at the 5 seats at the edge of the chamber floor. The 5 seats where the human delegation had sat for 22 years, ignored and dismissed. One of those seats was occupied. Han Do-hyun sat there, exactly where he had been for hours, his briefcase on his lap, his hands folded on top of it. He had not moved. He had not spoken. He had simply waited. And now, as the chamber erupted around him, he stood up. The movement was small and quiet, but somehow in the middle of all that noise and terror, people noticed. One by one, delegates stopped talking. Aides stopped running. Screens kept flashing their emergency warnings, but the voices in the chamber died away, until there was only the hum of the station and the sound of Do-hyun's shoes on the floor as he walked from his small seat at the edge to the central podium. No one stopped him. No one told him he did not have the right. The rules said only full members could approach the podium, but the rules felt very small right now. Do-hyun placed his hands on the podium. It was the first time a human had ever stood there. He looked up at the 761 species arrayed above him. 761 civilizations that had voted against his world without a second thought. They were all looking at him now. Every single one. The chamber was silent. Do-hyun took a breath. When he spoke, his voice was not loud. It did not need to be. "You were given every chance to treat us as equals." H1, new terms. Nobody moved. The chamber held its breath, and Han Do-hyun stood at the podium with his hands resting on its surface, and his eyes moving slowly across the rows above him. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. In a room full of species that had spent centuries shouting at each other across the stars, the quietest voice in the chamber was now the only one that mattered. 22 years ago, he began, a small ship from Earth arrived at this station. It carried 7 people. They had never left their solar system before. They came because they had spent their entire history looking up at the stars and wondering if anyone was out there. When they found out the answer was yes, they did not build weapons. They built a ship, and they came to say hello. He paused. The silence was absolute. They were given 5 seats at the edge of this chamber. Observer status, no vote. They were told to watch and learn. For 22 years, they watched. They learned your languages. They studied your laws. They signed your treaties and paid your tariffs and followed every rule you set for them. They never complained. They never threatened. They simply asked, again and again, year after year, to be treated as equals. His eyes moved to the Cathari section. Delegate Shurith would not meet his gaze. Delegate Shurith, you called our economy a pebble. You called our goods quaint. But when your factories needed workers who would show up early and stay late and learn systems that your own people found boring, you were happy to hire humans. When your shipping networks needed someone to manage the parts nobody wanted to track, you gave the job to us. You let us in because we were cheap and reliable. You never once wondered what would happen if we left. Shurith sat very still. His 4 hands were clenched in his lap. Do-Yoon's gaze moved to the paylock section. Grumman's seat was empty, his holographic feed dark. But his officers were there, listening. War Chief Grumman called us soft-boned herd creatures. He laughed at us in this very chamber. 3 days ago he launched 600 warships to punish us for the crime of refusing to be humiliated any longer. Right now, his flagship is drifting in an unnamed sector, surrounded by our ships, unable to move. His weapons depend on software that we wrote. His navigation runs on code that we designed. His fleet cannot find its way home without the hyperspace lanes that we shut down. He let that settle. We did not do this to prove that we are strong. We did this to prove that we were never weak. There is a difference. He turned to the Sylvani section. Emissary Liathine sat with her hands folded, her expression unreadable, but her eyes were wet. Emissary Liathine, you spoke with kindness when you told us we should be grateful. I believe you meant it kindly, but kindness that tells someone to know their place is not kindness. It is control wearing a gentle face. Our biologists engineered the bacteria that feed 3 of your worlds. We did that because we wanted to help. We asked for nothing in return except to be seen as partners. You saw us as children instead. Liathine lowered her gaze. She did not speak. Do-Hyun looked up at Grand Speaker Olvanis, who stood frozen at the side of the podium, like a man watching his house burn from the inside. Grand Speaker, you have led this assembly for 30 years. In that time, Earth came before you 22 times with honest petitions. 22 times we were denied. Not because our petitions lacked merit, not because we had failed in any obligation, but because it was convenient to keep us small, because a species with no vote and no power is easy to use and easy to ignore. Olvanis opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I am not here to punish you, Do-Hyun said, and something in his voice shifted. The steel was still there, but underneath it, something warmer. Something tired, but unbroken. I am not here for revenge. If I wanted revenge, I would let your hyperspace lanes stay dark for a year, and watch your economies collapse and your alliances tear themselves apart. I could do that. You know I could. The chamber knew. Every delegate in every seat understood with perfect clarity that the small, quiet species they had laughed at 3 days ago now held the power to cripple galactic civilization. And the man standing at the podium was choosing not to use it. Instead, Do-Hyun continued, I am here to offer you a choice, not an ultimatum, a choice. He opened his briefcase and placed a single document on the podium. It was printed on white paper, in simple text, without decoration or ceremony. These are Earth's terms for re-engagement with the Galactic Assembly. He read them aloud. First, full and immediate voting membership for Earth in the Galactic Assembly, with all rights and responsibilities that come with it. Second, unrestricted access to all shared hyperspace lanes for human vessels. Third, a permanent seat on the Galactic Security Council with veto authority, equal to the 5 founding species. Fourth, the Assembly will fund the construction of human infrastructure on 10 colony worlds, not as charity, as recognition of 2 decades of unpaid contribution to your economies and your systems. Fifth, a formal public apology from the Grand Speaker, entered into the permanent galactic record, not because we need your apology, but because we demand it, but because the record should show what happened here and why. He paused and looked across the chamber one final time. And in return, Earth will restore hyperspace lanes across the galaxy. We will re-enter trade agreements on fair and equal terms. And we will share our skip drive technology with the Assembly and all its members, freely and without restriction. A murmur went through the chamber. Share the skip drive, the technology that had just given Earth total military dominance. They were offering to give it away. We could keep it, Doyen said quietly. We could use it to control you the way you controlled us. But that is not why we came to the stars. We came because we believed the galaxy could be better than what we left behind on our own world. We still believe that, even after everything. He stepped back from the podium. The terms are on the table. I will wait for your answer. He walked back to his seat at the edge of the chamber, the small seat with the bad cushion. He sat down, placed his briefcase on his lap, and folded his hands. The chamber exploded into discussion. It went on for hours. Shurith argued and calculated and argued again, but the trade projections were undeniable. Humanity's re-entry into the galactic economy would stabilize markets within a decade. The skip drive technology alone was worth more than any concession the Assembly was being asked to make. Gromund's holographic feed came back online, patched through on emergency power. His face filled the screen above the chamber. He was furious, humiliated, and he refused. He called the terms surrender. He called Do-Hyun a coward and a fraud. He demanded the Assembly reject everything and fight. But Gromund was floating in the dark, surrounded by human warships, unable to move. His words had no weight anymore. Leothine was the first to officially speak in favor. She stood in her section and addressed the chamber with the same gentle voice she had used 3 days ago. But now it carried something different. Respect. We brought this upon ourselves, she said simply. Every word the human ambassador spoke was true. We were arrogant, we were blind, and we have been given a far more generous offer than we deserve. I vote yes. One by one, delegations followed. Small species first, then the mid-tier powers, then, grudgingly, the Kethari. Shurith voted yes with his jaw clenched and his 4 hands gripping the desk. Grand Speaker Olvanis called the final vote. The numbers appeared on the central display. In favor, 698. Against, 63. Olvanis stood at the podium and read the formal apology. His voice was hollow. His silver robes hung limp. He spoke the words that would be burned into the permanent galactic record, an admission that Earth had been wronged, and that the Assembly had failed in its duty to treat a member species with fairness and respect. When he finished, the chamber was quiet. Not the bored quiet of 3 days ago. A different kind of quiet. The kind that comes after something has changed forever. In the hours that followed, things moved quickly. On the far side of the moon, Shin Unji began the phased reactivation of hyperspace lanes, sector by sector, starting with the most critical trade routes. Admiral Yoon Nari ordered the fleet to stand down from combat posture, but remain deployed, a visible reminder that the balance of power had shifted permanently. Gromund's fleet was guided home by human escort ships. Within a week, Gromund was quietly removed from command by his own government. No one protested. On Citadel Omir, a crew arrived at the lowest docking tier and began removing the old docking clamps from the human berth. New quarters had been assigned on the senior ring, the upper level of the station where the founding species kept their embassies. It had a wide corridor, clean walls, bright lights, and a viewport that showed the full sweep of the station's interior. Park Soyun supervised the move. There was not much to carry. 22 years of observer status had not allowed for much accumulation. A few boxes of files, some personal items, a coffee maker that had been repaired so many times it was more tape than machine. She found Do-Hyun in the old quarters. He was standing alone in the small room, looking at the narrow viewport. His briefcase was open on the desk. Inside it, she could see the framed photograph of Earth, the one taken from the moon, old and slightly faded. "Ambassador," she said from the doorway, "the new quarters are ready. They are waiting for us on the senior ring." Do-hyun did not turn right away. He looked around the small room one last time. The stained walls, the buzzing light, the bad cushion on the chair. He had spent 9 years walking this corridor, sitting in this room, looking through this viewport. 9 years of being patient. 9 years of swallowing insults and folding papers neatly, and keeping his voice level when every part of him wanted to shout. He picked up the photograph from the briefcase and held it for a moment. Earth, blue and white, and impossibly small against the blackness of space. "We will take this with us," he said quietly, "so we remember what it felt like to sit at the edge." He placed the photograph carefully under his arm, closed the briefcase, and walked toward the door. So-hyun stepped aside to let him pass. As he moved into the corridor, she noticed something she had not seen in all the years she had worked beside him. He was smiling. Not the diplomatic smile, not the polite, measured smile he wore for the assembly. A real one, small and quiet and private, like something he had been saving for a very long time. They walked together down the corridor, past the old docking clamps, past the stained walls, past the buzzing lights, up through the station, level by level, until they reached the senior ring. The doors opened onto a wide, bright hallway. The lights were warm. The walls were clean. Through the viewport, the stars burned steady and clear. Do-hyun stopped at the threshold and looked out at the stars. The same stars he had watched from the lowest tier, from the small viewport, from the edge of everything. They looked different from up here. Not brighter, not closer, like they had been waiting for him to arrive. He stepped through the door and did not look back.